thank you all for coming back from lunch, back into the space that is the quality space. So far today, we've explored lots of dimensions of quality around education, around Wikidata, around tools to support quality processes on the wikis. So this is really exciting to me. My name is Phoebe Ayers, I'm a librarian, I'm a longtime Wikipedian, and it's really exciting for me to talk about quality at Wikimania because it's so foundational to everything we do. So this panel is a group of separate presentations, but like sort of interrelated ideas. We called it the Idea Jam on quality or future dimensions of quality because it's disparate topics, but they all are stretching how we think about quality and quality processes on the wikis. We've got, I'll ask people to introduce themselves quickly, but we've got C. Scott, Odd, SJ, and Victor, and we're expecting one more who will come midway through. So yeah, if you guys can just say, just a little bit about where you're from and what you're interested in, you're working on, and then the presentations. We're going to have some short presentations, and then hopefully time for discussion with the whole room. So, thanks.
Great. So I'm Scott Manning. I work at the foundation. I work on the parsing team, and as Phoebe said, I have like a little bite-sized nugget of a suggestion for a quality metric that I'd love to hear people discuss. So, so the question is how up-to-date our articles are. I should have a brief mention about the English language, right? So I think a more fluent way of saying currentness in English is currency, but that means money. And so, yeah, we're not gonna say money is quality. That seems like a bad idea. But we're saying how up-to-date the articles are. So how quickly after some event or discovery are they updated, and then how badly do sister projects lag? So there's an Olympics, somebody just won a gold medal, it gets updated in which wikis, how quickly, and what's the last wiki to get that information. Or we have new pictures of a black hole, which happened recently. How long does it take before those pictures are on, on every wiki? Right. So that's the big idea. Is basically can we quantify that? How can we quantify how current our wikis are? So one idea is we can correlate recent changes to the wiki. So we have sort of machine translation services now in 2019. And the way that modern machine translation works is that it scores text. So given an input and output text, it sort of figures out what the most likely output or input is. But the thing is, it doesn't just work, it doesn't just pick the best one. If you give it a set of possibilities, it can tell you what the probability for each one is. So you can use that to go through all the edits on two different wikis and score them against each other and figure out what the most likely corresponding edit to this one was of that. Then filter them, make sure that you have some bounds, make sure that maybe prioritize edits that include numbers, facts, and so now I can get a quantitative answer of given this edit to wiki A, is there an edit on wiki B that corresponds to it? What's the likelihood? And then measure how long between the time difference between those sets. And now I can boil that down into a number that sort of says what the average lag of different wikis are. Say English is a baseline, you've got a negative lag, and we have that information before each wiki does, and we hope that for like African topics, the Swahili wiki might have a negative lag compared to Wikipedia, and a positive lag would mean that you're lagging Wikipedia. And so the idea I want to leave with is, so say we can measure this, right? We come up with a robust metric for currentness. What happens practically if we use that as a metric to judge ourselves and to set priorities? Some of the things we already get, so Wikidata-based info boxes is a topic which we're actively doing, and the whole idea around that is to reduce lag. That if I'm getting the population of Germany directly from Wikidata instead of having it in text in each individual article, then when a new German census comes out, the population of Germany updates, everyone gets it at once, 0 lag. And so we can measure how effectively we're using, say, Wikidata in the projects by measuring actual lag, where Wikidata is supposed to provide 0 lag, but obviously not every fact is coming from Wikidata, And then we can use it to suggest tools, like a favorite of mine is the suggested edit speed. So if we see an edit which has corresponding edits on a number of wikis, but not on your wiki, maybe we can suggest that. Here's a picture of the new black hole. We think it would probably be useful in this article about black holes. And then the idea would be to get greater wiki parity so that we're all, regardless of the language you speak, you're getting the same information instead of having sort of separate subsets for separate people. And so that's all I got. So I'm going to pass the mic on. We'll talk about it later.
Thank you, Scott. Well, my name is Untitled Chapter. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm former board member of Wikimedia Netherlands. And next to me is Nora Noreen Nair. We've met in Wikimedia London, and we had a talk in spring over coffee, and we discussed about the quality of Wikipedia. And I've been reading a report by Jacques Delors to the UN, UNESCO, back in 1996. It was about education in the 21st century, and it talks about the 4 pillars of education. And that relates to my reflection on quality of Wikipedia. We have a vision that we present all knowledge in the end, in all languages, and that we provide educational content. But is this really true? Can we make that happen anyway? If I look to what's in Wikipedia, it is mostly academic or knowledge on an academic level. You won't find vocational information. There have been encyclopedias 200 years ago who make a mix of academic subjects and stuff people like carpenters and other tradesmen need to know to perform their job. To my impression, this information you won't hardly find any on Wikipedia. Now, this UNESCO report that talks about 4 pillars of education. It talks about learning to know, about learning to do, about learning to live together, and learning to be. And I think that's a good perspective to have in mind. We provide educational content, but we do not educate the viewers to the screens or the readers of the articles. We might not even educate the editors and contributors. So it's an area to wonder. What do we want if we look to 2030? Do we want only to provide a kind of academic knowledge, facts, or do we all want to cover other areas of things you can learn? Or do we say, no, that's not for Wikipedia, that's for other platforms to provide. And then we might be better to say, no, it's more restricted. So we don't look like a know-it-all all the time. Yeah, that's basically what I want to tell about this. Nora, you want to add something?
Sure. Hi, I'm Noreen. My Wikipedia is tech historian. I always wanted to say that loud, so that's why I'm doing it. So I think that one thing is this conversation here has been a lot about like also SDGs, and I've been working with education and SDGs, and trying to get on my personal, like in my professional life, more involved in not just promoting people creating more impact-driven companies, but also projects and learning about creating a lifestyle difference. And I'm thinking about a lot in regards to how our education quality in general can be seen differently by 2030, and how in that respect, like as Ad mentioned, is like, you know, we are a sum of all knowledge, and how do we make sure that it's an inclusive knowledge that has a quality that can be, you know, universally valued too. I think some of the things that, you know, right now we're in one of the sessions are in the very last leg of the last day, so I think it's a really great time for us to reflect on what actions we want to take as a community in regards to education in our regions, but as an education as well within our organization at a greater scale. You know, we've had a lot of conversations in the strategy teams in regards to, you know, different things like partnerships and advocacy and so forth. And as I sat there, I realized, like, inside of Wiki chapters themselves, there's a lot of confusion on how to educate people on a meta level about Wikipedia itself. So there's the education that Wikipedia has, but there's also this education of the growth of the Wiki projects and how to explain that. And I think there's still a conversation that's happening, but I do feel as though, like, I just had a conversation with some developers, and I've been thinking a lot about this. We are a community of so many librarians. Librarians are so great at organizing things. How can we integrate that kind of knowledge within this community to have a more organized, also, like, platform for summarizing the future of education within our community? That's it.
Cool. All right, thank you both. And
those are great questions, especially, I suppose all of us are librarians of fashion. And I've met a bunch of people here who I think are, in fact, librarians, but they say, no, I just play one on the internet. And of course, librarians who don't archive the internet say, well, I'm a librarian, but I can't interact with these kinds of rapidly changing internet sources.
What were you asking?
I'm SJ Klein. I'm at MIT working at the Knowledge Futures group. And I'm an old school Wikipedian who thinks that quality is, on the one hand, overrated, and on the other hand, something that we make. Like, quality is a dynamic with your audience. Hopefully this will roll into a conversation with everyone here. So I invite people to come forward once we're done talking, so we can all have a slightly cozier interaction.
I'll advance your slides for you.
Thank you, Scott. So I will. So one of the things that we do with the projects is we synthesize knowledge from a bunch of places. Wikipedia is a tertiary source. Most of the Wikipedia projects are tertiary. They're combining and providing some kind of balanced overview of secondary sources. We're essentially building some kind of federated understanding. So what can we do today? We can brainstorm. Firstly, public service announcement to people who you interact with. Wikis are editable. You should let people know that they can contribute back to public data stores. You can forward. Even the data policies and the products are editable, and a lot of people who maintain their own libraries don't know this. You can run your own Wikibase. You can update the Wikibase registry. You can make time to create bots that can automate the process. Essentially, the Wikimedia projects are one aspect of understanding the world, but the libraries are a broader aspect that focuses on access rather than reuse. There are libraries in communities in the world that have never had something like Wiki access, and maybe this is the decade where this flips and more people have access to Wikimedia projects that have access to local libraries, but we have to figure out how to bridge the desire to have a physical space with the desire to have deep knowledge in a space. we have federated data. Right now in Wikidata, there are many layers of different kinds of things and different tools that are all linking to one another, connecting through some familiar identifiers. We also have federated metadata. We have things like structured data on commons with a little wiki base that's storing local information about what's being depicted in an image, and then connecting that back to Wikidata through Wikidata IDs. And there's the idea that we can extend this to a larger open knowledge network. These are some of the components, but there are a lot of other large structured data sets out there. There are public and private knowledge graphs. There are scripts and feeds and cyborgs like SoWeGo and other scripts that people are developing that try to connect at scale very large data stores with Wikidata. And then there are increasingly generative models in AI, each of which have hundreds of layers of processing before they get to what they think is a feature of the world. And if you ask them, they might be able to give you some visibility into that. But we haven't yet determined how much transparency and how much granularity we need to evaluate whether that model of the world is meaningful. This is just an example from the Met of trying to generate images that might fall between some of the real images in a collection and that shares properties of a number of real images. How do you describe what that is? You can point to existing images and to a script and to a particular running of that script to build some latent space, but that's much more complicated than what we now think of as sourcing. So we have to come to understand that. And finally, we want to learn from the past models of knowledge construction. We're building richer understandings of the world, and individual curators are all learning to curate in a different way. And what quality means for a given use varies a lot across the world. In fact, even within this room, I would say the quality that's appropriate for a history project varies among people. And we need ways to help curators share what they've learned without everyone either succumbing to the least restrictive or the most restrictive concept of curation. Otherwise, we lose a lot. You can forward through a couple of these things. Here are some examples of models that link a number of different knowledge bases. So finally, provocations. What things should we be making more visible to one another so that our curatorial groups can collaborate without having to agree on everything? What refinements can we synchronize? What conversations should we be making more accessible? And what tools can we use to augment what humans are doing right now? And with that, I want to turn it over to Victor, who just gave a wonderful lightning talk about an aspect of this.
Hi, thanks, that's great. My name is Victor, and my username is XINENLV, speaking as a Wikipedian. I work at Google, and I just gave a talk about how we envision large knowledge engines like Google and others can contribute and need to contribute to the open knowledge world, and some prototypes that we built. And speaking in this topic's context, I would rather speak on my personal perspective as a Wikipedian because of my own experience as an individual, as a developer, and also as a member of information industry. I'm compared to many of people in this room, I'm comparatively new to Wikipedia as an editor, even though I started reading very early on, but I'm among the many that didn't know that you can edit Wikipedia until very lately, or didn't know how it works in that way. So as an individual community member, the first idea I would say is to enhance the power of community that connects people. Like I start to think maybe, I don't know why, but it seems like Wikimedia or Wikipedia movements are mostly focusing online. While many of the recent movement has shifted from online to also integrate like people that you know. Like I would imagine my first few edits and being reverted sometimes would be, the experience would be much better if starting off someone who I already know can be my mentor on the Wikipedia editing process. And so I kind of like that aspect. So if we can have ideas like being a friend to start to learn how to edit Wikipedia would be an interesting movement. And also speaking as a developer, software developer, I feel like we can have more contributions and more organized way to contribute to the community from our domain expertise. I talked to Dr. James and envy how that Wiki project medicine was able to integrate or to involve many doctors, physicians to contribute them their own domain expertise to this world. And while there are many already very good developers, and I feel like we can get to that point of how the medicine has been doing. And a good example that I see in the past few days is the coolest award, tool award. It's a great start that start to give software developers a sense of community, like we can contribute as a community, sub-community of this movement. And also as a member of information industry, I would say as the Wikidata's expansion and many movements has taken off, the edits from human being or review can be massively enhanced by the help of machine learning and other big data mechanisms. I think SJ gave a few great examples. So from that perspective, we can do a lot more. So that's my self-introduction.
Thanks. Yeah, so I feel like, we have bounced around between like sort of working with quality with big tools, automated tools, machine learning processes, bots, to thinking about the human dimensions. But I think this is all part of the same spectrum. Adenuri, you were talking about these ways of learning, which I think it's worth going back to: learning to know, learning to do, learning to be. What's the fourth one?
Learning to live together.
Learning to live together. And it reminded me of my favorite encyclopedia. So I have a favorite encyclopedia that is besides Wikipedia. I don't know if any of you know it. But my favorite encyclopedia besides Wikipedia is Chambers' Encyclopedia from 1728. Does anyone know it? Okay. Ryan does. So this guy in England, we know nothing about him. Ephraim Chambers, he published an encyclopedia in 1728. This was before the Encyclopedia, the great project in France during the Enlightenment. What is notable about this encyclopedia is it's full of how to do things. So like how to mill grain, how to build a water wheel, how to work on a blacksmith. And no one had recorded that kind of craft knowledge in that way before. I maintain that is still a gap in Wikipedia. Learning to do, learning to live together, that kind of knowledge. And so my question to the panel, sort of jumping off of that, is what gaps do you see? C-Scott sort of identified, I would say, this gap of currentness. Like the world keeps changing, we have to keep up with it. Currentness is often a gap. You'll see articles that are tagged like has not been edited since 2015, has not been updated since 2011. Currentness is a gap for us. On the other hand, there's big data sets that I know SJ thinks about, like related to cultural institutions, related to other parts of the world. I know in Google has a lot of data that is maybe not in our open projects. So what are some gaps that you all see?
Noreen already talked about the SDGs. There are some SDGs that are very well known within the Wikipedia movement, for which we have organized parts. We have SDG 4, it's about education. We have Wikipedia education program, and we have a thematic organization for education. And SDG 5 is health. We have Wiki project maps. And looking to women, there's an SDG, I don't know its number, that's about gender equality. And we have several groups who work on that. Then that leaves us with 14 other SDGs for which we don't have already an organized group. And I'm not for sure if there's much, there might be some content, but not so much. And if it is, it might be more on the academic part and not on, okay, but how do we solve this problem? SDGs 1 and 2 about how to eradicate poverty and how to eradicate hunger in the world, for example. So those gaps is which I do identify, but we had also an opening statement, and then he said, yeah, if you go to work, say museum, then people die. But people live up if they can relate it to their own lives.
Yeah.
So that's the part of learning to be. How do I discover who I am? How do I learn to accept myself? Or you can reflect later today or talk with someone. When did you discover who you really are and who you want to be in life? And how you've got to one identity, that there's a match just between who you want to be and who you are. So, and that you accept who you are. And the UN report reflected on this. This is a central part of education. How did you learn it? From whom did you learn it? And did you have to discover it yourself? Did you get guidance from your parents or your religious institution, if you're part of that, or from your wider community, or that's something to discover, and you can discuss within the Wikimedia movement. There are people who say, I'm a Wikipedia. Other people say, I'm a columnist or a Wikidata-ist. Is that really that's your role? Is that really who you are, who you want to be? Is that how you make a living for yourself? Some do, but others I know, you're just volunteers. It's a hobby.
Thanks.
I just want to add more on the editing in regards to, like, you mentioned the SDGs. One of the things that came up is the deprivation of actual content when it comes to agriculture. And so I think that's something that's a gap. And of course, there's been a lot of conversation around languages and support for the languages that are not the dominant languages. And again, that connects again to this content. One of the things I'm working on is hopefully helping support more projects within Myanmar. And one of the things that inspired that for me was the whole, there was not enough information coming out when all the genocide and everything happened. And I think with this new partnership with the High Commission for Refugees, I can never get their acronym right.
With the United Nations.
Yeah, the Office of High Commission of
High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Yeah, human rights. I think this hopefully will deal with a gap in regards to perhaps some of these challenges we have in languages too.
I was going to make a pitch for SDG number 10, which is my favorite, which is reduce inequities. So I see the currentness issue as part of the ensuring that the tide is raising all boats at the same time, and that we're not, because I do work on other climate issues with the same kind of trickle-down effect. A lot of green technology is expensive at the beginning, and so it tends to get adopted sort of from the wealthy down. And so we're heading towards a world where the most polluted places and the most terrible air and the highest gas prices are paid by the people who are at the bottom of the scale, and the wealthy side get all the best technology, the clean air, the electric vehicles, and whatnot. And so, in terms of knowledge, I feel that's the concentrating on going back to quality measures that sort of try to measure the equity between our wikis helps ensure that the information isn't just piling up on the English Wikipedia, but is actually making it to the whole world. And I think that accounts for practical information too. So that there's knowledge gaps where how to mill grain is maybe not the most vital information for an American reader of English Wikipedia, but for much of the world, that's much more relevant information for them. And so I think measuring content gaps in that way, in terms of like, what information, not just, do we have information on Wikipedia to settle bar bets, but do we have information on Wikipedia that you use every day to survive?
Yeah, and I will sort of invoke my status here as someone who'd like to say I pitched an idea in another track earlier today for a global climate change effort, writing about climate change on Wikipedia. Our articles are very bad and underdeveloped on all languages, but especially smaller languages. So, yeah. So, do you want to finish? Say something about gaps, and then we'll go to a question.
Yeah, I actually I'd like to add an echo to the education part, and I think there is a gap laid in consuming the way how we consume the Wikipedia knowledge or the Wikimedia knowledge and education. In that we haven't had enough. There's a gap between consuming it in an authoritative way and consuming it with the lens of critical thinking lens. So basically, there's still a big, the majority of people in the school or in the classroom, we feel that people are reading Wikipedia and think it's an authoritative source. Well, everyone probably in this room understands that everything on Wikipedia has to go through some critical thinking before you can take it, and that thinking pattern is, there's a gap laid in that thinking pattern, and if we can help more people understand that, we can not only help people be critical about what we wrote and what is on Wikipedia, but also give them a sense of how to contribute to Wikipedia, because that's the start, by questioning what it is and what are reference to check up, and then they will join the discussion. And what's more, if you take a bigger step back, the problem within the current world is people start to be forming their echo chamber, people have a hard time forming consensus or getting to live with someone who they disagree with. And then I think a good start would be if you start to contribute to Wikipedia, a basic understanding is that people will hold different opinions, and these kind of training, how to deal with knowledge, how to deal with consensus of forming knowledge would be a huge thing if we can have this gap reduced in education.
Cool, yeah. You want to speak on this, SJ?
No, go on.
My name is Elvin Woman. I'm working with knowledge graphs. I'm very interested in what you said. And I found some topics related between two, because some of you talked about how to define a model or a structure for a concept, for example. And yeah, I think there's an answer. Already you said that. For example, why not create a Wikimedia domain expert movement? We can start working in universities, I don't know, big institutions that can provide us with domain experts. It can be a step. Also, you talk about currentness of data. Nowadays, it's a really hard task. So nowadays also we are talking about active data, dynamic data, which you cannot type, you cannot keep all the time. So maybe it's still challenging with people. Also, you talk about the variety of data. Here I have a question, an open question. Wikimedia movement is open for everybody, and I know that Google Knowledge Graph is using Wikimedia, and when you Google something, you can see it. But how much of the Google Knowledge Graph is Wikimedia using? Are we, there is this connection between?
I think it's the other way around, right?
Well, I think it works both ways. Victor can talk to that.
Yeah, that's my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say, Victor, I think can speak to that super authoritatively. And before you leave, Ryan, just wave. Ryan is with Wiki Education, which specializes in reaching out to domain experts. So I think we can learn a lot from other groups in the movement as well. Okay. Yeah. So do you want to talk about the knowledge graph and data?
So first of all, thank you for the question. I think it's incredibly valuable, and I do personally feel that we need to communicate more to the community. And I have to make a disclaimer here that everything I said here represents myself as a Wikipedian, not the Google or not whoever. But overall, the industry, knowledge engine in general, make use of all different kinds of knowledge source they have access to. And Wikipedia, I think people will agree on this, that the product of Wikimedia, the knowledge product of Wikimedia movement has demonstrated a great quality that industry leaders like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon all found it very, very valuable. And sometimes when you say like how much of the information, let's say in Google or Alexa or Siri comes from Wikipedia, it's a very hard question because internally you can count many things in different aspects, right? You can count the number of facts in one of dimension. And also, sometimes that's not a very good indicator. Sometimes we count like number of impressions or number of weights, how many users are seeing it as a weight. So I don't know how much of technical details I can, or I should get into that, but basically major industry leaders have relied on a great source like Wikipedia a lot. And that's also why internally I've been trying to advocate that helping the source would be one of the great ways we can better improve our knowledge product and better serve our users. Yeah.
Understood.
So early in Wikipedia's history, people moved away from recruiting expert sources because there was the idea that there was only going to be one authoritative answer to what should be somewhere, and experts were a pain to work with. They were very convinced that they knew everything, both in their field and in other fields, and so as a result, even the best sources felt pushed away. Now we have better tools for allowing multiple perspectives to all be represented. We have notions of proportionality. You can have data in Wikidata with multiple conflicting claims with different sources. I think that's a lovely idea to try to start capturing specific kinds of context from specific audiences or specific data stores, even when you know that it's biased in some way. We used to also reject a data source that might be very good but had a known bias. And of course, nothing doesn't have a bias. The question is how well you know it. So that's an interesting thought. Maybe we could just do that within Wikidata without making a new sister project. But I think we also need to get to the stage where we are synchronizing the things that we think we know within the Wiki movement with other movements that also have a mechanism for review. And we might not agree on everything, but it will still be good to be in touch. So sending things on the products themselves, there's something called Global Fact Sync. They gave a small presentation here, if anyone got to see them. Sebastian Hellmann from DBpedia is working on it. That's just doing this inside the wiki projects, looking at info boxes, looking at data that comes from different wikis where the info boxes disagree, or where Wikidata disagrees with the info boxes, and creating a priority queue of things for editors to review, to figure out what the conflict is. That aspect of curation we haven't been able to tackle before, and now we can. So I think we need some automation to make it work at scale. But it's that's a very well-defined kind of problem.
Cool. So we have a few minutes. Anyone have a comment, a discussion point, a question?
I'm eyeing the sun.
Oh, you're eyeing the sauce. So I think a lot about how to keep us like focused on big ideas and then how to make them practical too, right? Like, what are, you know, where should we focus our energies and like thinking about engaging people to do new things? What are some ways forward? I think that's a question for all of us. I worry about quality on Wikipedia personally. You know, on English we have 5 million articles. You know, the quality is kind of okay to not so great for the vast majority of them. What do we do about that?
How can we, I see you have a question, but to your point, Phoebe, how can we visualize that everything should be checked and people shouldn't think of Wikipedia as authoritative while also improving quality? And there's a deep tension within the movement where some people want the projects to look authoritative. So can we somehow cut that knot?
I'm Magnus Seljer from Sweden, Stockholm, and I'm focused on a small thing like metadata, like birth, death, and so on for people. And I have it's from what I have seen is that when we take one of the best sources in Sweden is the National Archives data, which is and property in Wikidata. We have moved it into Wikidata. They have done research for 100 years to produce 50 or 100 profiles every year of biographies and so on. But it's high quality. And if you go to university people in Sweden and say, is it good or is it stupid? If a student comes and have a thesis or something like that, I haven't checked with them yet to redo it. When we move those 7,000-8,000 sources, facts about persons, into Wikidata, it explodes in 200 Wikipedian language articles. So we will see a person in India will read an article that is proved by SBL, they are called. And the problem is that it's high quality, it's there, but how should the reader understand that this is based on a good source? So we need, and I think Wikipedia with its global approach is excellent that you can explain that in Sweden we have those sources, and I have written a lot about it, how the quality of it, and what we see, a 100-year-old source that has problems. But I can also see the other way around. We have something in Sweden called the Nobel Prize. And the bad thing with the Nobel Prize is we give it to foreigners. So there we don't have the good sources. So there we have the problem that the Nobel Prize says this is good, but Wikidata say we have 60 differences because I do federation every night. I check with them, federations, and we don't know which one is should we trust. Should we trust the Nobel Prize? I don't want to argue with them, so they don't give the prize to me. So I mean, it's a problem when it's scaled with Wikidata, when it gets global. But I think the movement has a possibility to explain sources.
Sure. Okay. Comments on that, or last closing comments? Anything?
No, I think we
I just feel like I really echo what you said, just a little comments from like a really brainstorming, nothing solid ideas, but I think that the great thing of Wikidata is that it helps data become structural. But the thing that you described later has presented a problem that our discussion and our disagreement on like different perspective, for example, people or different data sets have a disagreement with each other, have not found a good way to structurally represent themselves on Wikidata of that disagreement. So while all the Wikipedia have found their way to find a good discussion, combat and fight against each other to form consensus, I think it would be nice if Wikidata can find some way to represent these data disagreement and also other opinion disagreement in structural ways, so people can contribute in the Wikidata native way of this critical thinking part.
Can I end with a bombshell?
Okay.
Yes.
Here's my bombshell contention, that an obsession with quality is a luxury of high privileged societies, and that most of our wikis would rather have low quality articles than no articles at all. There you go.
Derek Chan, our colleague, argued the same thing related to environmental content earlier today. So.
Okay, well preparing for this talk, I've been browsing the internet and came across the website of the international organization, named the Association of International Organizations. And that association has 70,000 members, or listed 70,000 international organizations, and the Wikimedia Foundation is one of them. And they've been working on SDG 9, on industry and infrastructure. They don't list this on SDG 4 education, so that's interesting. But on that website, and it is currently public, they have also an encyclopedia, and I still have to browse through it. But that's the encyclopedia of world problems and their solutions.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Noreen, SJ,
Okay, well, nothing major to add. I think I really like what they said about the luxury of quality. I think it's a fine balance with like getting content, like I said, like agriculture and all these other important topics that we still lack content within the wiki, within Wikipedia, but then also like balancing that with a decent level of quality, and knowing that maybe perhaps the privilege of all of us who have the luxury of quality is that we can maybe be more involved with what we talked about in our education panel, which is perhaps more like supporting the people who do the content and helping update the content for the quality, but getting there, promoting them putting in the content, and be more the quality assurance people as people who have that luxury to put that time in.
With that, I'm just going to say that there are notes on the EduPad, and I think everyone in this room has some wonderful ideas or thoughts about what quality might look like in the future. So I encourage you to take a minute and write down one or two thoughts, and they will all be summarized and put back on the session's wiki page.
And there's a stream, there's a recording as well. Thank you so much. So I will just say to close this out that this morning a few of you were here when Frank Schulenberg opened this track by challenging us to think about quality and the history of quality in Wikipedia, and challenged us to think about supporting each other as existing contributors to do high quality work as well as recruiting new people and movies. So I would challenge ourselves as existing contributors to support each other in thinking big as well, to like dreaming and continuing to have big ideas around this topic. So thank you all very much, and we will transition to the next session. Thank you.
track. I know it's been a topic of conversation for a long, long time, and we appreciate you making space for it so we can come to a consensus and actually stop talking about it and actually have an action plan. So, and thank you, Stockholm. We understand we're the last thing between you and a reception, but we're going to try and elicit some feedback from you. That's why we called it a workshop. So get ready to participate. And so this is our title. So the idea, I kind of said, gosh, what we need is a better process for improving quality than the current, let's just delete everything that isn't quality. So quality circles, I'm going to talk about that for a couple of slides, and then I'm going to give it over to my colleague here, and we'll talk about, let's document the process of inputting new people on Wikidata, and we'll use that as a kind of test of the concept too. So hopefully, coming away from here, you'll understand a little about quality processes, and then you'll look a little at Wikidata and then input to Wikidata. Everybody wants to know how to do that. So, okay, so quality circles, and there is an article, it's not very good, but this is kind of some of the things that you do to form a quality circle. So the idea is, hey, we have a quality problem, let's form a team, and then we'll work the problem. Historically, it's been considered a fad in the business world because it requires volunteers. So when you're a top-down manager, you don't necessarily want to trust volunteers to actually report to you and stuff. But here's about how you would go about it if you would collect requirements and do all this kind of checklist thing. However, the idea is it's not necessarily a checklist or a sequence. It's supposed to be a circle. So we're going to continuously improve quality, whatever that is. We're going to come to a consensus as to what is kind of in our circle, and then try to continuously improve it. And so here's an image from Commons, and they changed some of the nomenclature. The main thing is Plan, Do, Check, Act is historically the business version of that. But the idea is we're reflecting as we go. So we're not just ready, fire, aim, unthinkingly hitting things. We're trying to do some changes. We're seeing what the impact of those changes was, and then we're continuing on. And we're trying to have a cycle. We're not trying to improve things all in one shot, but we're continuously taking small bites at the quality apple. So this is kind of what a quality circle looks like. That was before, is how you form a quality circle. And what do quality circles do? Well, they think about issues like this. So I kind of borrowed this from Lydia Pincher. I wish you put this on Commons, but so the idea here is some subtle things about quality and errors, which is make them more visible, actionable. Because we love crowdsourcing, we're going to use crowdsourcing, and then fix sources of errors. So we're not just going to fix symptoms, we're going to try to do an error analysis also. And this is a good kind of action plan for your standard quality circle. And human curation, so that we just kind of duplicated, but hey. And some of this is counterintuitive because historically, we want to hide errors because they make us look bad and stuff. Whereas here we want to elevate errors because then the crowd can see them easier and act on them. Okay, so here, starting in our workshop, here's our first one.
So the problem that I chose for us is one that's quite prevalent, missing documentation on Wikidata, specifically for creating new people items. There are thousands of properties on Wikidata, and knowing which ones you're meant to use for which person or which type of person is very confusing and potentially overwhelming. The documentation that we need needs to be aimed at new or inexperienced editors and focus on which statements and which properties we need to use for creating people. On the Etherpad, I have actually put some headers that would be a good starting point for the documentation. should be able to see all of that. And basically what we need to do is find out which properties and statements we want to be using. We must be using that all people need to have. Additional properties that should be included. Of course, use of references and qualifiers and identifiers, and how to use example items of different occupations to find which statements we should actually be adding.
So we can exit over here.
Yeah.
And go to the Etherpad.
So, yeah, there's an Etherpad for this session, which is what they're discussing. It should be linked on the session page if people want to go there.
Okay, so get ready. We're going to ask for your feedback now. So if you can go to the session and click on the small obscure little notes thing in the session, this will take you to the Etherpad right here. And we can edit this all in parallel. And feel free to edit or here and put down your best thoughts.
So the first thing that any human must have on Wikidata is certain statements, and these are statements that, just logically speaking, every human being must have. Every human being must have a name, which I think I didn't put on there. They must be an instance of human. They must have a date of birth. Even if we don't know the date of birth, that could be filled in as unknown. And every human has a gender. Then we need to look at which statements humans should have, but maybe we don't have available: place of birth, occupation, image, and whatever else we can think of. Then there are a lot of statements that any human being could have. Thank you. Date of birth, date of death, place of death, manner of death are all death ones, and family. And there is a link there to a query that shows the full list of statements for humans. And then the next stage is to try and find the occupation. And then based on the occupation, we can find a model item which will give us all of the most likely statements that we want to be using for that type of occupation. So for example, the model item for an author is Douglas Adams, and if you look at Douglas Adams' Wikidata item, it's incredibly complete. It has pretty much every statement you would want to have for any sort of author. And then I just sort of added on the end, we probably should talk about the importance of references as well. So that's the outline of what we need to have in the documentation. And
I would just add as a kind of case study that I was recently at a edit-a-thon meetup with some librarians, and they were all tasked with bringing a faculty member and then creating a Wikidata item on them, and it got ugly quickly. These are catalogers that are used to, having to have the perfect entry at their cataloging, and so they're not used to the kind of wiki incrementalism. And there were other rocks in the road, I guess, but certain norms that are, the most required instance of human, that's kind of a little out of the ordinary. We take it, Wikidatians take it for granted that we know we have to have an instance of as kind of our first broad brush qualifier, but it's not widely understood by newbies. So I would say, yeah, it's good to put that at the top.
So what is the next stage? Should we ask people to start filling out some of these sections?
Yes.
Would you like us to group up a little bit?
Yes.
Any questions or comments from anybody? Okay.
Now we're speaking about Wikidata, and one part of this ecosystem is Wikipedia. And what I would like to see is that we help the author in Wikipedia So when a person should start edit, they can go down to Wikidata and get information. And one way of getting information is to find good articles, recommended articles. And I don't see, now we're getting 40 new properties per week in Wikidata, so it's exploding. and find grade is one. This source I spoke about last session is another one, which is a good start for writing an article. And I would also like to see that we have properties for that. We have some described by, but we don't have a convention saying that this property should be like you have in an article, recommended reading or something like that.
We have model items for many different things. So for example, we'll go a little bit of a circle here.
So what I was saying, share a concept, and maybe that's what you're thinking about. So we do the same, because we are inventing a lot of things in Sweden, and nobody else will do it in the same way.
If you go to most occupations listed, occupation. This is Douglas Adams's item, and you can see it's extremely well filled out. Grandfather, mother, sibling, spouse, child, native land, occupation. There we go. So if we go to novelist. We should have a model item, but we don't.
So while you look for that, I would say, like, the objective of this session is to think about how we write documentation for other people, right? For ourselves and for other people. So how we think about documenting processes and how we think about using quality processes to do that. And so I would agree with Magnus's comment. It is confusing. Wikidata properties are incredibly confusing. Like as an example of which ones to use for what item and when, that is something that is super debatable. And so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this practice is to get us to think about describing that out, right? For ourselves and for others.
Yeah, and there's been some development of external tools that are more just fill in the blank.
Right.
And which require a Wikidata item to be there before you can add fields. So it doesn't help you create the initial one though.
So I think it might be helpful if we gathered up a little more closely maybe to do this work. Do we have us work on this project together?
You want everybody to stand up and stretch?
Maybe. It seems like sorry. But was there a question? Sorry, I didn't see our hand. No. Okay. Yeah. Do you want people to work together, or?
Sure. Let's come together and maybe brainstorm a little. Okay.
Good. So yes, do stand up, stretch, maybe move up a little bit.
Again, the question general question I would say is, what documentation would you like to see in order to make it easier for you to create new items in Wikidata? That would be, an open-ended one.
Sure. Has anyone created? Are people familiar with Wikidata? This group? Yeah. In the middle. I know you are. Property documentation is the big one for me, Jim. Like how, Laura and I have done quite a bit of work on model items. like for various and sundry types of things. Because it's very hard to know what properties to use, especially when there's like two properties that are basically they're sort of the same, but not really the same. Like, which one do you use? Which is different from identifiers, but like, if your choices are replaces or follows by, like, when's it appropriate to use which one? And I think usage is a bit inconsistent, right? So that's a good question.
Work in primary topic.
Sorry.
Yeah, there are many such pairs like field of work and primary topic, etc. And I also wanted to mention an amazing tool that is weirdly underutilized and under-celebrated, like most of our tools, called Cradle, which is astoundingly simple. It lets you just pick a topic like museums or monuments or historians and describe a set of properties that you would usually like people to populate for that kind of item. And then you can sit a bunch of relative newbies or less experienced people with Wikidata with some reference sources like a biographical dictionary of historians or something like that, and just have them type in to a data entry form, which Cradle gives you, with just those relevant properties. Now this tool, as far as I know, is documented, but kind of a reference document. I don't know if anyone made a nice, I don't know, Medium post or like recipe. Here's how you do a data entry event using Cradle, for example.
Yes, the Smithsonian definitely knows about it and is going to use it. So, I mean, there's appreciation, but yeah, the new user's guide would be really nice.
Yeah, I'm thinking more globally than just suggesting to you guys, obviously. I think the broader community doesn't know this tool exists.
Well, you know, we're going to share a video, so we're going to evangelize, but yeah, and it's that tool problem is we create these tools that can do a lot of good work, but how do we socialize using the
And then we
tool?
don't tell anyone about it.
Right, yeah.
I have a couple of questions or whatever. That is it Credle? How do you spell? Cradle. Okay. Also, you know, lots of times I'll get stymied if I want to put in a property and it doesn't exist, and I don't want to deal with the process of you know, I mean, I wish that was simpler for, like, you know, somebody got an award, but there's no property for that.
Yes, it's true. The property completion, it works sometimes, but you have to know the right sequence to search. So we could use some help there. Yeah.
Yeah, that should definitely be better.
Okay, yeah, so put that in the list. Are there other things? What's tough about making a Wikidata item?
Oh, I'd add another one is these weird warning constraint tags that come up. They really turn off newbies. They go, what did I do wrong? And then they stop. And we say, hey, it's a wiki, just leave the constraint there, someone will fix it later. And it's hard for catalogers to get that because they're used to getting blamed when the entry is wrong.
I think that the dates should have a better documentation as well. I usually upload a lot of images to Commons and then to Wikidata, and sometimes I'm not sure how to use the dates. Also, I agree with you about the constraint, and I'm also a little bit more interested now in leximas, which is something that we haven't talked about a lot.
So schemas.
Yeah. Could you talk more about schemas? Or ontologies?
Lexemes.
Lexemes.
It's another name, it's a different namespace on Wikidata with L's instead of Q's. And yeah, I'm not quite sure how much is on there, but it's growing, I think. Nicholas is doing a lot with that.
I want to say one more thing about constraints.
Yeah, I'll just kind of get nice with you guys. This one's harder. It's easier for one person.
So one easy fix that it seems to me we could do about constraints is when you have that alarming exclamation point and you hover over it or click it right, and you see it says, for example, I don't know, you have someone listed as someone's spouse, and it says, you know, well, that other person should also have, you know, should be mutual.
Yeah.
The phrasing of the violated constraint doesn't always immediately suggest, so how do I fix it? Like, what action am I supposed to take? And while, of course, sometimes it's not trivial to decide how to resolve the constraint, if that pop-up, if that piece of information would also say, typical ways to resolve this would be, you know, 1 and 2, already that says, oh, I can just go to that other item and add spouse off, and, you know, that's great. So that, you know, and we don't do that. We stop short of providing that little extra step that we could.
So I would say for me, another Wikidata specific problem, but also kind of a general meta Wikimedia problem, just to make this big, is whenever I teach Wikidata to anybody, I mostly teach it to librarians, I have a hard time explaining why it exists, like what it's for, right? And you have pages and pages and pages about like the value of open linked data, and you can make lots of examples, like you can make lots of queries of examples. But so okay, maybe good explanations for particular audiences. I think we often lack context in our documentation. We often just jump right into like, here's how you file an AFD, not like some Wikipedia articles are deleted because they are found to be out of scope, right? Like, you know, we often like skip the big picture part in our documentation, so.
Yeah, we don't really talk about why and wherefore, do we? Although for librarians, it's authority control is a good selling point, isn't it, or not?
Sure. I'm saying in the big picture, it's like it's difficult to talk about Wikidata in particular because we have kept it so loose, like we've kept it open. You know, Wikipedia has a good analog, right? Oh, it's an encyclopedia. Wikidata kind of doesn't have a similar frame of reference that most people are familiar with, even for librarians. So I would doubt that.
And it's interesting the different philosophy to data from the average catalog record, which is they tend to be closed and hard to change, and they tend to be open and easy to change. So and they work well together because, you know, they can go back and forth.
Other people? Problems with creating an item with, yeah.
It only kind of gradually dawned on me that there are two, like, you can either have location or you can have located in the administrative entity or whatever, and I'm like, why do we need two different, like, you know, one of them was like, maybe it was for a government agency or something. Anyway, it just seemed to be too complicated to me to try to make that distinction.
Yes, you're stumbling on certain community disputes that are resolved by having both. Yes, there's a lot of geo, what location are we talking about going on? And yes, I don't know how we document that for new users because there's a lot of stuff in the weeds there.
Yeah, not at all as far as I know, as far as I remember with that is a special example of the located in. Other things?
Okay. Are we all happy with what we see on the screen? Is that something we can buy off on?
You might make the screen a bit bigger, Sean. Yeah, super great.
Because you know the next step would be create a nice page on Wikidata and then call it, you know, intro to creating biographical entries or something.
Okay.
So I guess that's a sign up from everyone that we can actually cut and paste that right there.
Are we happy with this as our documentation for people entries? I don't know how much.
And then we're all going home and working on the action items too.
I mean, it seems like kind of starting before you start adding statements as you were doing the search
So like, at this point, this is missing kind of the step to check and see if there is a person, already.
And the why and wherefore kind of statement, yeah.
One thing I think helps is if we find projects in Wikidata that work with a group of people that has target working with a group of people, so you easier can see them.
Yeah, I do know we were talking in one of the Wikidata meetups about trying to solve that from a more technical issue, where as you start to fill in an item, you will be prompted with possible projects.
Yes.
But that will need technical stuff changing. I do know there's a lot of talk about that because there are a lot of projects, but knowing that the projects are there is the problem. Like with this, where we want to get to with creating the people items is get the basics done, get the sort of obvious things that we can all think of in our head the humans should have. Or it's in the way I see it is there's statements they must have, statements they should have, and statements they could have. And they're generic statements for all human beings. And then we need to go to a model item or a project or something that's got a schema to tell us by the occupation, because for people that's normally where it starts to diverge, what we want to fill in for those people. So I did actually find, here I'm on the occupation of screenwriter, playwright. So this is an occupation that you would add to if the person you were creating was a playwright. And then once you've added it, you can jump to this page and model item, for example, we go and look at William Shakespeare. And then from William Shakespeare, you should see how to correctly create another playwright. So in here should be all of the useful things more relevant to playwrights, of course, given name, family, and these are all of our generic statements that all humans must, should, or could have. Native languages, there's lots of occupations, and then things like this, we have a constraint here.
Well, and don't the model items, I mean, this is how all documentation on all Wikimedia projects work, right? Like you look for something that exists already and then you build on it and you copy it. And the model items are supposed to provide a place for that. I mean, to Magnus's point earlier, there's a whole slew of identifiers from catalogs that aren't on our list, like every identifier about people that we can possibly come up with that should be in an item about a person. So, yeah. So we have about 10 minutes to kind of wrap this up, so. Yeah.
Okay. I'd say any final questions, comments from the audience? Because I'd say we have an instruction set or some documentation. I put the slides on there if you want to link on them and read them again. And they have some links to where I got my pictures from. Or you can go review Lydia's slides. That slideshow for quality on Wikipedia is very nice. And final comments, thank you for participating. Hopefully this wasn't too bad, this quality circle. It's nicer when you have lunch, it's a coffee collection. You can actually write and complain and get things done.
So I have a question for you, Jim. Like is what we just did, where we sort of talk about like our issues, our problems, like and brainstorm ideas, is that an example of how you would run a quality circle on a topic like
Yes.
this?
So I mean, this was it was kind of a low-key one.
Sure, well, we're all very tired. It's the end of the day, for sure.
When everybody's full of coffee and they've just gotten bitten by somebody deleting something that wasn't quality, well, yeah.
Sure,
Then
sure.
it's a little higher tension.
Sure. And then are there next steps you would recommend? Sort
Yeah,
of
so
out
I would just think about how to build teams. So if you have a problem, think about, instead of trying to be the big man solving a problem, which yes is a guy thing, think about a circle and let's share some of the load, and then kind of cross-train in our team and see this method and then try and share it with other people. You know, so if you see a problem, try and find other people that agree it's a problem and let's work on it, even incrementally. Even having a problem statement is an improvement. You know, and there's plenty of places on Wiki to go hide stuff, you know, on Meta and have a coffee clash and improve process problems.
And what I like about this approach is I think we're very prone in Wikipedia to, I see a problem, I'm going to sit down for an hour some night and like hack out a specification or hack out a document. And then you have this piece of documentation that has sat there on the wiki sort of untouched and unloved for the last like 10 or 15 years. A lot of our help pages look like this. And I like this like idea of getting people involved to write our documentation in the same way that we would get people involved to write an article, you know. Having many hands and being intentional about it as a process.
I really like your idea with this working together, but I'm trying to scale it up. So I've been trying to do it with the Swedish governments, and that's impossible. You go to people, no, we have some people running around here from the National Archives. They are much more skilled than me and have the old Swedish administrations and so on. So they maybe have another granularity, but do you have any advice, good examples where we can see, we need to, if we get something. I've been in contact with 15 governments, and people get scared when people from Wikidata comes and so on. And we need to, if someone succeeds, we need to have a showcase or something like that.
Yes, but for the Wikipedians, it's more a Wikipedia answer, as we had this tea house thing on English Wikipedia that kind of followed this model, and it's been around for...
But that's inside Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's inside Wikipedia.
I would like to have the government people.
Well, yes, so the Japanese, so this method, the Japanese kind of used back in the 80s and 90s, so, you know, we have this Deming Award and all that stuff that was awarded for companies that did this, and then the American version was trying to do the Baldrige Award, and it's seen as a kind of fatty thing, but so there are a bunch of star examples for each of those awards if you wanted to go out and look.
But in Sweden they are good on people are giving away pictures on commons and so on, but when you start speaking about domains and linked data or Wikidata, it's starting getting rather complex. So
yes.
You have to find a good organization, you have to find the correct people, and you have to not scare them.
Yeah, we've found some interest among librarians, so if you had some national librarians and catalogers, I would go talk to them and maybe see about building links with them and then kind of evangelize there.
Yeah.
Archivists are a little behind on Wikidata, I think. They're more interested in commons. Although, see, you're gonna pull them in with linked data on commons, structured data on commons.
Yeah.
So they're gonna end up there anyway.
Yeah.
It's just a little roundabout. But yeah, I'd say we've seen a lot of interest from just regular librarians in the United States. And old Andrew Lee's been giving his presentation at Smithsonian Library Congress for a year or two now, and it's always packed. People are excited, so I would try there first, and then try and build it up.
Good.
Just to summarize on where we got with your circle, so we basically did planning, didn't we? Right, and the next stage will be to take what we've planned and get it up onto an actual documentation page, and then we check, we change, we plan, and we carry on. So we got.
So yeah, we should be able to make a page on Wikidata, maybe announce it on Project Chat, and then start including it in our editathons and meetups for newbies of editing. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you guys. And thank you all for sticking through to the very end of the day, even though it's only mid-afternoon. I know, it's like we've been with media for a week. There is actually I was wrong, there's a break now, a break until 4, I believe. And then we will all go into Ala Magnas for the closing ceremony. So stretch, get a coffee, take a break, and I will see you in the big hall shortly. Thanks.
Thank you. That was very nice. Cool. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Very into the day. It's a little bit of time, but thank you.
That's fine. Yeah. Yes, hello.
You are in Israel.
Yes.
Thanks for coming in last minute. Yeah, no, I know. I appreciate it.
Yes. She's here.
She's here, yes. She just joined our board of trustees.
Yeah. She had a telephone interview with me. Someone, so maybe she'll say. But you are not the person doing on the Wikidata query.
I am.
Oh, yeah.
I made the long video tutorials.
Yeah, but are you the developer?
No, I'm not the developer of Wikidata.
No, the query. There is stuff
For the sake of
Adam Jordan. He works for Wikipedia Charter. No, I'm not on the development team.
I've seen your name.
Yeah, I do a lot of Sparkle and I teach Sparkle.
I thought you were the same.
What do you mean?
I've seen a lot of videos, I think, of you. You are
That's me. Yes, that's me. I am the same person.
But you are not really core developer.
No, I'm teaching people to
I
use Spark.
But I have a problem. When they changed the query stuff, the results, number of results was gone. And the bug and it was the same person.
All right.
Then it was bad that we met, and then I was even more impressed by you. But thanks for the video. Sure. What have you learned about explaining Wikidata?
Well, I have learned, for example, to start with the why. That's why my introduction to Wikidata doesn't start with showing Wikidata. First, it starts with what problem does Wikidata exist to solve? Why are we Wikidata? Why should we care about
the problem or show something sexy?
No, start with the problem. My introduction is aimed at the people. People who are already into phrenology stuff. Already is the answer to the question, why should we care about this new thing?
Yeah.
If I'm talking to like